the home of a twat with too much free time, and I thought I'd start off today's video with a story, because who doesn't love a good story? Anyway, where were we? I went to Vidcon this year. I had a great time and met loads of top lads and handsome chaps. And if I did have the chance to meet you, I hope I see you again. And if I didn't, I will be at conventions in the future, hopefully, and it would be cool to see you there. I was inside one of these halls at Vidcon. As the roaming fees are absolutely insane, I had to rely on Wi-Fi, and there were only certain places I could attain it. This hall was one of those places, but it was fairly late, the hall was fairly empty, and I was messaging people to try and ascertain their location so we could go and chill. Then I saw something, the doors opening. I turned my attention. Lo and behold, there stood Billy the Fridge, and there sat in his mobility scooter, Boogie2988. They were stopped by a fan, and they told them that they were on their way to a meeting, so I decided against intercepting them myself. I am a courteous gentleman. For the very few who are unaware, Boogie2988 is a YouTuber known for a range of videos. He has this persona, Francis, which is a satirical take on gamers, and then this other set of videos which discusses more deeper and personal topics often, and even some drama. So I saw those lads, I let them go. I didn't have anything to speak to them about regardless. I mean, what could have possibly unfolded over a few days of banter at Vidcon? Well, due to my lack of internet in places, I paid less attention to the internet, and when I did, it was typically at unsociable hours. So when someone asked me what I thought of the Boogie situation, my initial response was, wait, what? Yes, apparently at the time that I saw him, a situation was actually at the peak of unfolding. One very interesting discussion which was to result in an eventual apology from the man in question. I'll explain the basic situation before going into a bit more of a exploration phase. The predicament that arose wasn't actually sourced at Vidcon, it was sourced briefly before Vidcon when Boogie made an appearance on the H3 podcast. You know, the podcast hosted by H3. It's in the name. But anyhow, he was on there and they were just shooting the shit, and the topic of VidCon 2017 came up, an event that I will be covering in more depth later. But to summarize, he hosted a panel with video game feminist Anita Sarkeesian, and at the end of the panel he said something that she objected to, and this led to a confrontation and subsequent discussion. However, during the discourse about this situation on the H3 podcast, Boogie said something that people took objection to. He made a few comments, one notoriously about gay marriage that some felt was in poor form. This led to a lot of back and forth between Boogie and these critics, and eventually led him to retracting his original statement. This inevitably was followed by accusations that Boogie was fence-sitting, some for the comments he made, and then some for the subsequent retraction. However, this isn't really new. In fact, Boogie has been in this position times before. Even the original situation where he made a video on meeting Anita Sarkeesian, he received these same allegations. Unfortunately, you cannot please everyone. However, generally I do believe that people should stand for what they believe in, and shouldn't just cater to every side, as although these things often bank on some sort of subjectivity, there is a societal context that may make a certain choice preferable. So today, what I'm going to be doing is my own little personal investigation into whether Boogie can be considered a fence-sitter, initiating with a little exploration, discussion, and then reapplying it to the situation in question so we can hopefully come to a bit more of a steadfast conclusion on it. So what I did is I pulled up a selection of Boogie videos over the last few years in which he covered drama, some more contentious than others, to try and decipher if he's been employing any tactics that we would be able to pin down to fence-sitting, pandering, or anything else. Maybe I was pleasantly surprised and found to be a man of strong principle, just of elaborate reasoning and the proneness to being persuaded. Or maybe I just found it a facade for someone who is just trying to please every demographic. I watched a few Boogie videos on drama in my time, but generally I do not follow him too closely, so although some of these were revisits, most of them were looked at with a fresh eye. So without further ado, let's get to it. So I watched a selection of Boogie videos, and I have compiled a various range of observations, and we'll go through them in a sort of chronological order. I started by watching his response to Nicole Arbour's Dear Fat People. I found it an appropriate video to start on, as I had recently covered Nicole Arbour myself, so I was wondering what he had to say about her defining classic. And generally, I think out of the videos I watched, it was the best one, and I think it managed to demonstrate what Boogie could be at his best, taking a concrete stance while still being considerate of those that may disagree with him, and attempting to appeal to them as well. That's something that I feel is very important, so I do actually think this was a strong video to look at. For example, saying that obesity shouldn't be indulged, but while still having that reservation that there are ways to be constructive about it, and help people make that change in a way different to what Nicole Arbour thought was preferable. I followed this by taking a look at his Logan Paul video, and he did not necessarily say anything I disagree with in that one as well, and he definitely got it out soon enough to avoid the accusation of not bringing anything to the conversation. However, this is where I outlined one of the defining features of Boogie's approach to drama. He tends to approach the video assuming that the person has good intentions.
But now let me say, I do believe his intentions were good, because if you look at the end of the video, he includes the suicidal national hotline number, the same one I included down below. He gave out the message that you're not alone, that there are people here that will help. I think that's all good stuff. Logan, if you do stuff like that, you're going to have me at your back. I'm going to be standing up there for you, and I'm going to be very proud of you. That's good stuff.
Generally, I think that's a fine idea, and it's one that I use regularly. As a base rule, we should always approach the situation under the premise of reasonable doubt, that we have reason to believe that someone has good intentions until there is enough proof to suggest otherwise. However, the problem comes around when you set that burden of proof too heavily. This generally makes you too permitting of someone, and may cause you to view them positively even when their actions suggest otherwise, and they may continue to take advantage of that. Case in point, the Fine Brothers situation. I think given the level of evidence their behaviour provided, it showed that their intentions were not entirely pure, to say the least. However, in Boogie's video, he gave far too much benefit of the doubt to them, despite the dangerous levels of corporatism in their idea. It also revealed one of the things that I think is one of the most credible criticisms to be levied against Boogie, and one that I would definitely place forward myself. Instead of saying this is a bad idea, it should be stopped, he said, well, if it goes well, it'll be great for everyone, and if it doesn't, it'll be a disaster for everyone.
This may turn out to be a good thing, and I really hope that it does, but the proof of the burden lands on the Fine Brothers, and they have to get this right, because if they don't, there's going to be hell to pay for all of us, man, and nobody wants to pay this particular bill, and that's why people are mad.
Which is something that can be said about a lot of plans. It represents what I call the whiskey problem. What, right opinion? Boogie isn't an alcoholic. Yeah, shut up you pleb and give me a moment to explain it. The if by whiskey argument is the ultimate fence sitter's logic. It was called that because it was originally attributed to a speech made by a lawmaker on prohibition. I'm not going to read it out, but there's the transcript if you want to pause it and put it in your cringe compilation. Anyhow, this isn't a far cry from what Boogie was alluding to in his Fine Bros video, and I think this follows through from his assumption they may have had these plans with the best of intentions. But although there are many possibilities, there is only one reality when these plans are put to the test. Fortunately, the Fine Bros pulled the plug on the idea due to the initial backlash. I think that in that situation, given the circumstances, taking a firm stance against it very strongly was the right thing to do. I think waiting to find out how it goes is a bad approach in these situations, and the it could go well or badly is a cop-out position, especially when the projections appear to say that it could go very badly. It's important to take a stronger stance to make sure this idea is not continued with, at least in its current state. Fortunately, everyone else managed to stop the Fine Bros, though it is food for thought. There are people on these platforms that do not have good intentions. I do not think it is a bad thing giving people chances, but there has to be a line drawn. And the problem is if you are too permitting to these people, you end up letting them get too far. And then you end up being walked all over, which conveniently takes us to our next point, the Anita video. This upload is one of his most disliked videos. This was the original take that provoked the podcast discussion. This definitely outlined another key problem with Boogie's attitude that a lot of people have picked up on, his constant focus on pleasing people. Now once again, the concept of this in moderation is perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with being empathetic towards others. However, a lot of people pointed out that he came across as far too much like he was policing himself to the point of oversensitivity. Now the story that Boogie told in this instance didn't necessarily come to a bad ending. They had a discussion and it sounded fairly constructive. However, generally, I don't think it was the outcome that annoyed people, because this is not an outcome that would occur every time. I think it was Boogie's ethos that irritated some people. It creates two problems, in my mind. If you show yourself as someone who tries too hard to please other people, then you leave yourself prone to having people who will make unreasonable demands. And when you say no to them, they will become upset and aggravated, and you will buckle. Also, if you focus too much on pleasing people, it becomes hard to stand for anything in particular, because plenty of people disagree on topics, and although there are plenty of reasonable people, being afraid to upset the unreasonable ones will often make you overly cautious, and may make you not really stand for anything. Now, this isn't to say that it's good to be the opposite. Being a big old bellend doesn't necessarily work either. But Anita is a great example of someone who, in spite of my many criticisms of her and her attitude, she's not afraid to make them feel uncomfortable. And that is one thing that I will stand by. We should not always focus on making people comfortable. There are definitely standards of conduct, but you can't pander too much either. Sometimes opinions will be said that make others uncomfortable, and I think Boogie worries too much about that. I watch a lot of Boogie videos where he discusses his own experiences and his own mental health issues, and I think his positions on drama likely arise from the fact that he has been so exposed in his earlier life to a torrent of negative abuse that he really wants to avoid that confrontation. And I completely understand that, but I think even with that in mind, there are definitely ways you can handle drama in a more opinionated fashion and being able to stop these things while still avoiding the vitriol of the online hordes. I mean, you're on the internet, you're going to receive hate regardless of where you stand, especially when you're Boogie's size, and he knows that. And I think an important part is how you respond to hate, and when the hate is a bit higher than normal, it's important not to backtrack just to appease the masses. I want to clarify that I don't think there's an issue with admitting you're wrong sometimes. In fact, being prepared to admit you're wrong is an important part of any discourse. However, it's the reasons for admitting you're wrong. If you see someone's logic and you understand that point of view, then you may want to change your mind. However, Boogie often seems to backtrack to appease the number of people who object to him rather than their own logic. He made a video in response to Grade A underage allegations that Matthew Santoro was plagiarizing his videos. Now, in the video, I can understand how some people may have interpreted it as a defense, but I personally found it quite a decent look at the situation. Although not all of his points were entirely relevant to the discussion that I feel many were trying to have, his approach seemed fairly reasoned. However, at the time, everyone was very riled up from the situation, which is quite a common phenomenon, and one that I might cover in the future. What I'm going to say next, I can't necessarily verify, as the video he claimed was unlisted has now been removed entirely and I had to watch a re-upload, but he likely received criticism that he was being too soft on Santoro, and although he was definitely being very soft, it wasn't anything out of the ordinary to him. So even when presenting his defense, he presented the arguments as third person, while his conclusion actually seemed pretty reasoned. He concluded that Santoro's was probably fair use, but he could still see that it incorporated plagiaristic elements and that was still shitty and it had no place on his channel, and he should definitely be held to account on that. The following day, he made a video apologizing, saying that he screwed up. Now, in hindsight, this may have pleased the critics initially, but a lot of the comments now say that he didn't need to make the video, and I agree with them. Interpretation is a significant part of your content. Often how you present it will depend on how other people interpret it. However, there are always people who will interpret it from an exaggerated point of view, either against them or against you. That number will increase in reactionary environments. People are provoked by drama, and this emotion may affect their reasoning. Boogie has to pay mind to that and avoid being pushed over, and that's the thing. Boogie often judges himself on the public response. That can lead to two problems in dramatic situations where response may be disproportionate. Firstly, if you side with the angry crowd in an attempt to gain popular support, time will transpire and your anger will be shown as overblown, and this will undermine your credibility as an arbitrator for the community. On the other hand, if you avoid that and you face immediate backlash, you may have the tendency to buckle and give in to the angry mob, which will frame you as someone who's more focused on catering to opinions rather than having your own. Generally, I think it's really easy to be caught up in crowd outrage, and the community of commentary has been no stranger to that. Even I, on occasion, have done it, but long term it pays off to be rational, which may even include having the unpopular opinion sometimes, and that's something that Boogie does occasionally seem afraid of, and that might stem from the fear of receiving negative feedback, but you can't measure your opinions on the like to dislike ratio, which is also why, in spite of the problems with his video on Anita, I actually respect it for staying up in spite of the turbulent public response. Boogie seems to run a series of algorithms that create his opinions. This is something that a lot of us do subconsciously. However, we all lean on different rules, different heuristics to help come to those conclusions. No one's thought process is entirely the same, which is why we come to different conclusions. I think Boogie's algorithms probably lean too much on those around him and their immediate emotional response, which often leads to heavily mitigated opinions and occasional retractions, rather than what may be best long term for people to hear. And I think that's the core issue. One of the greatest concerns might be that Boogie always takes up the least offensive opinion, that there is an algorithm that just focuses on how many people an opinion might offend, and how deeply they are offended. So even in a situation like the Anita one where his video wasn't necessarily popular, although a lot of people disagree with his point of view, none of them really held it against him, which may be something Boogie's paying attention to, and although his opinions aren't unreasonable in a way, I think that I and many others like justification for one's opinion to be more than just an attempt to please others. You cannot afford to become too reliant on your environment. This leads us to our latest situation, one that showcased a lot of these problems and a few new ones. Now, before I watched the video, I actually checked out the tweets insinuating the drama. It seems there were 2 points of interest. The point that toxicity on both sides is something that should aim to be avoided died down pretty quickly. There was a bit of a backlash, but he dealt with it fairly competently. And in all fairness, if you were following this drama in real time, then you might be mistaken to think that it had all died down after the couple days following the video release. He addressed this initial point, and it was laid to rest. So what exactly revived it? Well, eventually he tweeted about it more and more, and then he got caught up in his comments about gay marriage. So after VidCon, I sat down to watch the clip, very conveniently uploaded so I didn't have to trawl through the whole podcast, Papa bless. I could have just skipped to the specific comment, however, for context's sake, I thought I'd watch the whole thing. After all, it wasn't that long, and it might provide me with additional information omitted from the tweets. So I sat down and checked it out, and the first 6 minutes passed without incident. He framed himself as a bit firmer than in the video the year before, but otherwise it was fairly consistent, and then the sentence that must have lit the fuse was uttered.
Like, I've always believed, hey, we should have same-sex marriage. I love same-sex marriage. Let's do it. But the problem is, we try to get it done right now, there's going to be a huge backlash, okay? So let's try to do it in 20 years, in 10 years, and let's see if we can avoid the backlash, right? Let's just like slowly, methodically change minds. I've always been a big fan of slowly, methodically changing minds because I don't like it when gay people get killed. I don't like it when somebody gets murdered for being gay. So let's not rile up the fucking crazies, okay? Let's just go slow and easy.
Now this immediately struck me as off. On the surface, it was just a terrible logical continuation from the previous talking point. He was saying that the way that Anita conducted herself was often too aggressive for many people to empathize with, and thus made her cause harder to support. This is a reasonable point of view. When you're trying to convince someone else of your opinion, Anita's technique is seldom the best, and has led to a lot of ridicule. But to follow this line of reasoning about gay marriage seems strangely bizarre, and let me explain why. His point was that he would have rather waited for more people to have been convinced that gay marriage was a good idea rather than legalize it immediately to avoid backlash. This implies a follow from argumentative reasonability, but legalization doesn't really fall under that. Gay marriage carries a lot of weight behind it, but it's more of an outcome rather than a technique. Very few people are going to change their mind about the legalization of something while it's being legalized. At that point, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. It also doesn't help that Boogie provided no time frame for his argument. He didn't say whether this waiting of 10 or 20 years was from a position of a few decades ago or from the present day. It was a very confusing example, and one that in context does not hold up. By doing this, he focused on policy rather than how people argued it. And even though criticizing someone's delivery is a perfectly reasonable thing to do because it will alienate people, it doesn't necessarily change the validity of a greater point that might attempt to be made. I do believe that it's smart to call people out who are championing causes in a destructive fashion, and have regularly said that a good cause does not give you any right to behave like a twat. But an argument still has a stance regardless of who the proponent is, which is funny as that was literally something that Boogie just acknowledged. But okay, in spite of this strange contextual logic, does the argument have any merit on its own? So his point was that he'd want to hold off legislation to avoid giving the crazy people ammunition to go crazy. But I personally think that's a poor line of reasoning. Generally speaking, in modern times, there is a sect of the population that will always be a bit nuts. And then you have the rest of the public, who are fairly reasonable individuals. They may be wrong from time to time, and they may be more divided on certain issues, but most of them generally are open-minded and ready to hear you out. The thing about legislation is, although it's fairly affirmative, if that particular legalization doesn't have a huge impact on an individual, they will judge a response on how proportionately appropriate it is. So if the the crazies did go crazy in response, many people would simply side against them and actually the case for gay marriage would just be strengthened. The problem is that when we're discussing gay marriage, as Boogie acknowledged, these nutters are merely looking for ammunition. They're not looking to be convinced. The people who are reasonable are those who we should be interested in. The only real concern we should avoid is making the crazy people look reasonable. But I don't think that's something that legislation would do, nor is it something that it has done. In fact, gay marriage support is at an all-time high, probably because people realised it didn't have much impact on their lives. If someone is out killing gay people, they may be a tough cookie to convince that gay marriage is worthwhile. On top of that, given the passivity of the legislation, it's not like education and discourse cannot continue after it. We can still carry on discussing these things. We can still carry on going out and trying to convince people, and now we also have the idea that actually it's working out quite well as further proof. One of the things that I personally have found, so take this with a grain of salt, is that many violent extremists are not extremists because they are strongly politically inclined, but for other reasons surrounding their personal lives. And at that point, what they do is hijack a political notion that seems most justifiable to them. I think Boogie views their intentions as purely political, which is a fault from my point of view. Some people have heard all the arguments and are simply just not interested in engaging on your level. There is a difference between violence and action, which is why many of those who argued against Boogie referenced a famous Martin Luther King comment. King was very avidly against violence, but also wanted action. So comments about not engaging on their level made by Boogie are not all-encompassing and should definitely require distinction when he makes them. Otherwise, it doesn't make much sense. Still, this was only half the story because although I believe his position was greatly flawed, it was a bit of a throwaway comment that may have required some discussion but not the level that it received. He then made this tweet, which is a curious one, because I think he was still trying to address his initial comments that he'd already dealt with, to be honest. But the replies tended to want to lean towards this gay marriage comment, the one that was flawed. He got wrapped up and he just couldn't stop digging. I thought I'd like to address this point on the side note because I think it's an interesting one. Why some people on the left are considered to be more vitriolic. And this generally stems from ideological differences. The left are partly driven by the idea of justice, what they view as an inherently moral concept. To contrast, the right would respond, well, this is what works, and in a way it is justice. Whereas the more judgmental, perhaps even arrogant sects of the right tend to view their detractors as ignorant, requiring education but not necessarily action, the more judgmental sects of the left tend to view their detractors as immoral, and immoral people can never act in good faith. Education would not change that, and therefore they are undeserving of a public platform. The tweet that set it all off is actually quite a good follow-on from this point, because someone does say that gay marriage is a moral issue, and I've discussed this, but you can see why his reply may be ill-advised. What this led to is more and more tweets, and then Boogie said this, which, once again, is a sign that he's kind of fence-sitting. Because in the space of a tweet, he says, yes, fuck all these people, but still let's try and persuade them, which I feel demonstrates Boogie's very flip-flop approach. He's cursing these people off while still appealing to persuading them. Now, if a few of these people are open to persuasion, they're probably not going to listen to someone who has just openly said fuck you. Boogie essentially creates a contradiction by trying to satisfy his critic, but in effect just defeats his own original point, because unless he's proposing that other people do the educating, which would really undermine the principle of practicing what you preach, he seems confused in himself what point he's trying to make. I also think Boogie attempts to be a diplomat, but can also regularly come across as condescending, such as here. On top of that, one other thing I've noticed is that he has a habit of appealing to his good actions, which although may sometimes be in fair context, can push the bounds. Moral appeals are fine if they are relevant. If someone's accusing you of not supporting certain causes, it may be fair to show evidence of supporting those said causes. However, when the moral area becomes a bit more grey, you have to tread carefully to avoid trivializing these good actions, as well as the fact that you need to ask yourself, do you need to promote your moral credentials to respond to someone's point? It's both about necessity and relevance. I just think Boogie has too many people to appeal to at points. He calls them an outrage mob, which many people would probably not like, to say the least, and then says, I hear you loud and clear. And you can definitely make those two separate points, but without qualification of who and what in these situations, it might just irritate the good actors and give more ammunition to the bad actors, something that you said you wouldn't want to do. And then you make this comment, which in effect seems harmless, but I'm a cynic, and it's hard not to see it as an attack on an extremely small minority of people to try and gain kudos with people that may have been pissed off with you. I seldom saw anyone actually say this to him throughout the situation, and this all seems particularly calculated. After a few days of back and forth, he just retracted and apologised, but it sort of came off as a "can you lay off please" rather than actual apology. He kind of shimmied himself into a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, that if he retracted he'd seem like he's giving in to people, and if he doubled down he might be going against the reasoning some people presented him. So I don't want to give him too much more stick for this, but I wish he'd focus more on himself when making these statements. When Boogie does something, it can often come across with other people in mind. He always manages to include others, and although sometimes it might be justified, it often sounds like he's devolving responsibility. It just means it becomes hard for him to stand for anything. And I think in these situations, when you focus on so many differing people, it becomes so easy to contradict yourself that you undermine your own credibility. Boogie clearly wants to be reasonable, but reason should be an equally internal process rather than relying solely on the reaction of those around you, as it means that those around you can manipulate their reaction to possibly influence you. When you're a public figure, there may be people who can call that out. However, too many people don't have that opportunity, and I hear Boogie's stories of exploitation and manipulation, and it does pull on your heartstrings. Yet I feel his public status is equally a blessing and a curse, with one side protecting him from that manipulation happening again, with the other exposing him for that vulnerability. And you can't just allow your environment to shape you that easily, because in the wrong situation it makes you prone to being complicit to some very bad things. I think that's what concerns people. Fortunately for Boogie, I think the weight of those around him is so evenly spread that it won't ever lead to anything particularly damaging, but I think it's important to keep in mind we can always do better. We can always challenge our audience, so why shouldn't we? I've had the same problem as Boogie in the past, particularly in video form, and what I found was that I had trouble coming to conclusions due to the amount of influential conditions, and it's easy for things to be taken out of context and used against you, so it is important to qualify your statements. To be clear, to make sure people understand you, you can still gain respect from a majority of people and actually taking a harder stance against these bad things that may be happening. People aren't solely concerned about opinion, and the ones who are typically the ones who will never be completely satisfied anyway, as you'll never be fully on board with them. What matters is respect from the people who are reasonable, and a lot of people are reasonable and do care about you, Boogie. There's a lot of people who relate to the struggles that you've been in the past, and you're definitely a guiding force to a lot of people who are experiencing the troubles that you went through. A lot of us on the internet have experienced that pain, and anyone will tell you that that pain doesn't just go away, and I feel that sometimes you let it be a part of you when responding to these situations, and that you are greater than that. Making people happy is a good thing, but appeasement isn't always the best option, and I think today's analysis may have outlined a few problems that hopefully can be worked on, because I think as an inspirational figure there is a lot to like, but there are also many flaws, and that's something that can be worked on. Boogie recently made a video lamenting that his channel might be dying, and I think that may come from the fact that people have sometimes lost faith in the more serious takes, and Francis is a dated concept that he can't rely on nowadays. He needs to turn to something that he can hold on to. There will always be drama to react to, but it's your reactions that will shape what kind of audience you retain. Most things are not black and white, but instead of leaving it grey, you can pick apart the details that may be easier to distinguish. That's what I did today. Saying Boogie is a fence sitter or Boogie is not a fence sitter isn't particularly constructive, because it's not that simple. Often it depends, but if you don't provide the conditions which it depends on, the people can't really take anything away from what you say either. And I think that's what distinguishes you from being a fence sitter to someone who stands for something. You can still believe in it, but have reservations. Every sensible doctrine should in a way, but if you don't state them, people just see you as someone trying too hard to appease individuals, and you'll contradict yourself countless times because you only speak in vague language, and people will eventually become detached from you as a creator, because a creator who stands for nothing stands for no one. Anyhow, that's the end of the video. I would love to hear what you think about Boogie2988. I get a lot of mixed responses from a lot of my friends about what they think of him, and therefore it'd be really good to see the audience's verdict. I would also love to thank my fantastic editors. They all are budding and coming up and making great content as they are right now, and I would definitely implore you to check them out if you have the time. This video would not be here if it weren't for them, so please send them some love. Also, if you want to reach me, you can get me on Twitter at The Right Opinion, fairly rudimentary. I'll also leave my Facebook link in the description below and my Discord link. I will be more active in there. I promise. I say that every video. I've been a naughty man. We're going to come back stronger than ever. Anyhow, I don't think I really have too much else to say today, apart from thank you for all the support. As always, it really does make a difference for me, and I look forward to making these videos, and that's something truly special. So for that, I thank you, and I'm The Right Opinion, and I'll see you in the next one.